Hello, thank you for joining us for Thoughtworks WAFR Bytes episode 2 security. It's nice to have you all here today. I'd love to start off with our webinar by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, wherever that may be. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Yananchono. I'm a lead business development manager here at Thoughtworks, and I'm really excited to get to chat with you all today about the AWS Well-Architected Framework and security pillar. I'd love my colleague Alan to introduce himself too.
G'day, my name's Alan Blockley. I'm a pre-sales solutions architect lead here at Thoughtworks. I'm also an AWS Ambassador and an AWS community builder as well. So I do all sorts of things AWS based.
Thank you, Alan. So our agenda for today, folks, I'm going to run through a welcome from Thoughtworks and who are Thoughtworks. Some of you may have heard the name before, but I'd love to give you an understanding of our organization. Alan will then talk about the AWS Well-Architected Framework and the important part that we're all here for today, the security pillar. We'll then talk about how you can implement the well-architected framework into your existing architecture, and how you can perform well-architected framework reviews to ensure that you're keeping up with AWS best practice. We will end with a Q&A and contact details for you to reach out to Alan or I after the session today. So who are Thoughtworks? Well, we're a global software consultancy firm, and we've supported many clients in Australia and around the world. And many clients in Australia, from fledgling startups through to some of the country's largest brands that you can see on the screen here: Atlassian, REA Group, Qantas, Domino's, PEXA, Xero, and NAB. We help a range of different clients that can be from startups with 1 or 2 people in the organization right through to large enterprise clients with thousands of employees. We're an end-to-end digital partner combining strategy, software engineering, design, and organizational transformation. And there are 4 main areas in which we support our clients. You can see on the screen here. That's customer experience, product, and design. So things like bringing your idea to market, designing your customer experience strategy and product design. Enterprise modernization and cloud. So think modernization strategy and execution, migrating to the cloud or making the most of your investment in the cloud. We're even able to help with operations in the cloud through digital application management and operations, or what we call DAMO, a managed service. Data and AI. Here we help customers build robust data strategies and platforms, as well as cutting-edge AI and Gen AI applications. And digital transformation and operations. With DTO, we help our clients build and execute on digital strategies. Over the last few decades, Thoughtworks has been at the forefront of technology innovations, with multiple pieces of literature being authored by our colleagues. We really aim to define the way modern digital products are built by the most advanced organizations. We've been operating for over 3 decades and currently have over 10,000 employees across 51 offices in 18 different countries. This allows us to build the perfect team to support our clients, often utilizing distributed teams across different regions of the world. And multiple of our Australian clients use distributed teams, based out of, say, Australia and India or Australia and China. And the really exciting stuff, our partnership with AWS. As a leading digital transformation partner, we really recognize the value and importance of collaborating with other trusted technology partners to bring our clients the best solutions for their business. We partner with AWS to build the capabilities that are required to succeed in today's digital landscape. We are a premier tier partner, the highest tier that you can achieve with AWS, and have multiple AWS competencies and accolades that you can see on the screen. It's probably a really good time for me to pass to my colleague, Alan. Now, bit of a shout out. Alan recently received an award for being the top AWS ambassador in Australia and New Zealand, an accolade that he did receive the year before as well, 2 years running. And he has all the AWS certifications under the sun. So he's going to delve a little bit deeper into the next part of our presentation to talk through the well-architected framework and the security pillar.
Thanks, Mickey. Appreciate it. And sorry, the golden jacket's too warm to wear at the moment in Brisbane. So it's staying in the cupboard. But thanks, appreciate it. So over the next half an hour, I want to talk you through the AWS Well-Architected Framework and specifically talk about security. So To talk about the well-architected framework itself, it's 6 pillars. Just a quick reminder here that we start off with operational excellence when we're talking about well-architected, which is all about things like automating change and responding to events and defining standards to manage daily operations. Security, we're talking about this in a bit of detail today. This is all about the confidentiality of your data, the integrity of your data, managing user permissions and establishing controls to detect security events, but also what you do about those security events as well, how you enact on them. The reliability pillar is the third pillar that we generally talk about in terms of well-architected, and this is all about distributed system design, recovery planning, and how that recovery plan, that BCP, as it's called in some cultures, adapts to changing requirements. It's probably one of the most important pillars to a lot of customers. Performance efficiency is the fourth pillar that generally gets talked about in terms of well-architected. This is all about those instance sizes, instance types, making sure they're optimized for your workload, making sure they're performant. How do you track that performance? How do you maintain that performance? Cost optimization is the fifth pillar of the framework, and that's everybody's favorite pillar, right? Everyone loves saving a couple of dollars. This is specifically going to be picking on instances that you've decided are to be performant. Well, are they going to scale? Are they going to scale without costing you too much money either? How are you managing your spend on a monthly basis as well? How do you stay in touch with the AWS bill without getting bill shock? And the last pillar of the AWS Well-Architected Framework is sustainability. This is the newest kid on the block. Well, it's been around for 2 years now nearly, but it's still the newest pillar. And this is all about being green. This is the shared responsibility model between yourself and AWS, understanding what the downstream impact is on the environment from your workload in the cloud. So with that in mind, today we're going to be talking about security. What is well-architected security? And I think just like last week in episode 1, I'm going to refer back to an expert in all things AWS to explain what AWS is. This is a quote from Werner Vogels back in 2019 during the Summit Tracks. Security is everyone's job. Ultimately, what Werner Vogels talks to at this point is that security is no longer the job of the person who deploys it into the cloud. It's now everybody's job, from the person who programs the code, to the person who delivers it to the cloud, to the person that it looks after the infrastructure. It's now a team effort. It is job zero. Today, I'm going to talk about some of the most common and important considerations in a well-architected environment that will help you understand how to be secure and practice best practices in the cloud in AWS. Security foundations. This is probably one of the areas that Mickey and I see quite a lot when we go through these reviews. How many customers have you seen, Mickey, with security foundations that might need a little bit of attention?
Mate, it's got to be over 3/4. I think even customers that are doing a lot of things right, generally there's something that can be refined and done a little bit better and a bit more aligned with the well-architected framework, especially when it comes to that account architecture.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it comes down to is multi-account architecture is the key tip here. Customers are so keen to start building in their environment that they don't think about what that logical best practice might look like. Excuse me. So the first tip that I've got for you today under security foundations is to implement a multi-account architecture. You've got your production account where you've got your baby. At the end of the day, you've got all the data in there. But if you want to allow a developer to come in and start making changes, you don't want to make changes in production. Don't test in prod, as they say. Have a development account separate. It's got a separate data framework built into it. It's got a separate piece of source code so that if something breaks, you're not breaking what your users are using. You're not bringing your customers down with you. More to the point, if you actually had a breach in development because of test code not being secure enough, you don't get that breach in production. Your data is safe. The production account should be sacred. It should ultimately be the one account that nobody touches unless it's really, really necessary. Instead, have a development account and maybe have a test account thereafter. So you go from development to testing, whether it be user acceptance testing or more of a staging environment, just to test that everything works. And then a production account. Encompass this with a management account. So then making use of AWS organizations. This way, using these two practices, Control Tower or AWS organizations, you end up with a secure foundation of an account structure. Designing a custom VPC configuration is also quite important. When you first launch yourself a new account, you are presented with a set of defaults. These defaults are out of the box public, and there's a reason for that. AWS want to get you moving and developing and going to market, and it's useful because you can start with whatever you want and start to get your MVP up and running, but it's not considered secure. The subnets are public, so you get a public IP address. The security groups are open by default, and so it means you can use it quicker, but it's not considered secure. Instead, look at implementing a subnet configuration where you have a public subnet at the top, just like I talked about. Everything's open. Put your load balancers in there. Then have a private subnet instead. And that private subnet is where you'd store things like your EC2 instances, your compute instance, the bit of the workload that's going to be doing the hard work, and pass the traffic from public through a load balancer into the compute subnet. And the final subnet that I would recommend you organized, that you arranged, would be a secure subnet. Don't allow any internet into this whatsoever. Make sure that this is where you store your data. So you then end up with a sequence of events, load balancer into compute, public into private, and then private into secure, where your data is stored. And then control it with network access control lists to make sure that certain layers can't touch each other. You then get security in layering. It's very important to set up these two best practices, multi-account architecture and custom VPC design, to create your basic security foundation. With this in mind, you can then carry on building in a secure way, knowing that your data, when you deploy your database or your shared file system into that secure subnet, it's going to be secure straight away. But deploying your compute resources into the private subnet, you know that they're not going to have an IP address attached to them because they're in the private subnet straight away. This is also security by sensible defaults as well. Identity and access management forms another basis of security that a lot of customers don't think about immediately. Again, they're so keen to get in there and start working and start building. When it comes to then setting up appropriate permissions and security levels, it's often forgotten about. So how do we make this easier? There is a service built into AWS called IAM Identity Center, or as it used to be known, and as it's more commonly known as, Single Sign-On, SSO. The main recommendation here is that when you then set up your AWS organization inside of, whether using Control Tower or as a foundation, you're going to have all these accounts that need access. So setting up IAM Identity Center gives one layer of identity for multiple accounts. Historically, if you were to be using IAM users, you would have to set up an IAM user in each of those individual accounts, and that's got a high overhead and can lead to mistakes as well. If you forget to take one person out of one of those accounts when they're offboarded, it could be a disaster. IAM Identity Center is ultimately the go-to identity provider for a multi-account structure. You can configure it so that when you log in with the IAM Identity Center pool of users, you're then presented with a list of accounts and a list of roles, for example, read-only, developer, administrator. You can then configure it in a granular way that certain users only have certain rights to certain accounts, other users have access to all accounts maybe. But the key driver behind IAM Identity Center is to provide temporary credentials at all time, helping reduce the man-in-the-middle attack. When you log in using IAM Identity Center, what you'll find is you're issued a set of temporary tokens, temporary credentials that are launched in the background and then refreshed. And then that way, you're not at risk from any form of common vulnerability or exploit through identity. Bonus tip as well when it comes to IAM Identity Center is federate your login. What I mean by federation is to federate it off to either Google, your Microsoft, your Okta, whatever your favorite identity provider might be. That way, your identity does not sit inside your AWS account. In fact, it's federated off to the experts in identity. And then that way you can use just-in-time provisioning so that when you launch a new user inside of your standard onboarding procedures, they've automatically got access to whatever they need access to in AWS. And they're offboarded just as well, reducing the operational overhead and risk that you might have in AWS. Second bonus tip for identity as well, if you've still got IAM access keys set up in your environment, make sure that you rotate those every 90 days. A lot of customers set up temporary IAM access keys to then connect their application to S3, for example, and they forget about it and it becomes part of production. This happens. This is a common configuration. Just make sure that you've got a rotation in place by using a business procedure, a business policy instead. Put it in a calendar, put it in a ticket system, have it scheduled every 60 to 90 days to go and have this reset. My next tip is probably one that Michael's seen quite a lot. How many of your customers, Mickey, have admitted to still using the root account?
Too many. And, often forget information about it, don't know who has access to that account. Sometimes people that created root accounts leave the organization. It can get messy sometimes. Yeah, root accounts can get messy. And this was the original way that you were able to log into AWS when AWS first started up. And it still exists today as a primary method of registration. When you first log into AWS, yes, it's an email address. Yes, you give it a password. And the first thing you should be doing with your root account is setting up multi-factor authentication on your root account itself. When you register, though, what account have you registered with? Have you registered with alan.blockley at something.com? In that case, who owns that account? What happens when I get offboarded? Where do all the emails go to? So think about, before even setting MFA or registering for an AWS account, what email address do we use that makes it a business asset and not a personal asset? A common configuration is to set up a distribution list, AWS at something.com, or whatever your company might be. Use that as a distribution list and add key stakeholders to this list so they can all have access to the emails that come to the root account. Emails that are sent to the root account are very important. Generally, they're billing requests. Generally, they're security alerts. Generally, they could be important deprecation alerts that you need to act on. So making sure you do receive the emails from the root account is important, but making sure that it's not an individual is even more important. So use distribution lists. One of the cool things that I've seen in the Google and Microsoft email platforms, I'm sure it exists elsewhere as well, is plus notation. AWS plus prod, AWS plus dev at domain.com. That way you have one distribution list, but you can use the plus notation to create unique individual addresses per account, because you can only use one email address per AWS account. So securing the root account is important. Once you've registered your root account, once you've given it some multi-factor authentication, think about what multi-factor authentication you've used. Have you used a mobile phone type of authenticator? In which case, again, that's attached to an individual. Whereas if you use hardware MFA, similar to YubiKeys or the 6-digit RSA keys, they're physical tokens that have to be owned by the business. Store them somewhere that's accessible to the key stakeholders, like in a safe, or
use your imagination at that point. I often get asked by customers, what happens if there's a fire? Use a fireproof safe. So ultimately, the root account is important. And then once you've set up your root account and you've secured it, don't use it. Go back to my previous tip, IAM Identity Center. Set up IAM Identity Center. Make sure you've got access for your user base or your developers or your staff, and then make sure that root account is put somewhere safe. Managing permissions effectively is the other area that gets neglected regularly when it comes to identity and access management. I often see customers who haven't done reviews on their permissions or identity configuration in over a year. And it turns out there's 3 or 4 user accounts that still exist that were offboarded months and months ago, but they still have administrator access to the AWS environment. This is obviously not a good security position to be in. So invoking some level of 90-day review of permissions by either a dedicated security team or your IT team to ensure that you are reviewing that, you do see who has access and when they have access. But also think about permissions similar to the role that the user has. So, for example, I might be a developer. Do I need access to the management account of the organization? Do I need administrator access? Or do I just need access to services like code deploy, code pipeline, maybe S3 to store things? So start to think about permission sets in terms of the role in the business that person holds. Set up permission sets as groups and maybe have them as departments instead. But certainly think, does this department or role need access to this service? And then create custom permission sets where possible. There are some sensible defaults built into AWS here, such as administrator, developer, senior developer, read-only, billing. Billing is a common one that happens. Once you invoke single sign-on, you then give access to your finance team to go and take billing actions. So that's another important one there. Bonus tip with permission management, there is a concept called service control policies, SCPs. These provide broad, organizational-wide permission policies, or guardrails, as they're known as, that allow you to lock down regions or services away from end users. That way, you don't get surprises like somebody's launched an instance type too big, or they've launched stuff in a region that you're not actually observing. So that's another important one, service control policies. Intrusion detection and protection is another interesting concept that a lot of customers don't address. Some customers think that it's an AWS managed service, so it's fine, it's not going to have any problems. I often talk to customers that have no visibility over what's going on in their account. And you say to them, how often do you get port scanned? Well, I don't know. It happens, especially if you've got a public EC2 instance with a public IP address, you're going to get port scanned. That's using essential compute, that's using essential resources that you're paying for to run your product, and also to acknowledge all of these different styles of attack that might come up, all these different probes. How do you identify the probes, though? How do you identify where they come from? AWS Guard Duty is probably the first thing that I recommend you to enable in terms of security. Enable it in all regions and all accounts. AWS Guard Duty is a lifesaver. I've personally seen this in the wild, where a guard duty has alerted to an act which would have cost the business $100,000 or more, and actually by alerting, it's then saved that problem. What is guard duty, though? Guard duty is an intrusion detection system. It uses AI and ML algorithms in the background to baseline what is normal in your account with your usage. And then it will alert you on the abnormal. For example, if you are a business in Sydney and you only use Sydney, and an EC2 instance is launched in Tokyo or Mumbai, it will alert on that. It will alert when an S3 bucket gets made public. It will alert when somebody logs in with a root account. Anything which goes against best practice or abnormal to your usage, it will appear as a finding. It will categorize the findings, and it will tell you as much detail as possible about that incident. Where did it come from? What access keys we used? It will link to CloudTrail as well to try and pick up other information. But that's not enough. My bonus tip here for guard duty is not only make sure that it's enabled, but also make sure that it alerts. Guard duty is like a fire alarm. It's no good having a fire alarm you can't hear. So make sure that you set up guard duty to alert somewhere that you can hear, see, or enact immediately. But that's detection. What about protection? You've seen all these probes happen. You've seen all these attacks happen, port scans. You've seen someone try and attack your SSH server. How do you protect against these? That's where the AWS Web Application Firewall comes in. If you've not got a WAF, you're possibly opening yourself up to all sorts of risk at this point. A web application firewall is very much like the firewall that you'd have in an office, like an appliance. However, this sits at the application layer. You attach it to your load balancer, to CloudFront, to an API gateway maybe, anything that sits at the edge of your network and accepts application traffic. You can then configure it to inspect packets as they come in, to inspect traffic, and to block traffic that may offend certain standards. For example, the OWASP top 10 is a common configuration of the WAF. Anything which might contravene that, it will block. You can configure it to block certain IP addresses. Maybe you've had one specific IP address that's been troublesome. You can configure a custom access control list to block certain IPs. And more to the point, you can configure this for CVEs, common vulnerabilities and exploits, of any of your runtimes and operating systems, Linux, Windows, Ubuntu, PHP, Python. If there's a CVE attached to it, there's generally a rule set available that's managed by AWS as well. To make this product more powerful, utilizing AWS Marketplace, you can go to a security vendor and pick up a managed pack from whoever your favorite managed security vendor might be. These packages turn your your web application firewall into a very much an edge device to protect against anything that would cause you security issues. So moving on to things like encryption. This is another one that's very interesting from the customer perspective. The most common objection to encryption I hear from customers is they don't want it to impact the performance of their application. And I want to dispel that myth right now and say that encryption at the cloud level does not impact your workload performance or the way things work, the workflow. Werner Vogels, CTO of Amazon, yes, I've referred to him now twice in 2 weeks. He was quoted as saying, "Dance like nobody's watching, but encrypt like everybody is." This is important. Security is job zero. We mentioned that earlier as well. Encryption is just as important. You want to make sure that your data is your data and nobody else's. So when you've got an EBS volume attached to an EC2 instance, encrypt it. Same thing with your RDS instance, encrypt it. That SQS queue that you've got over there, encrypt it. If the word encrypt exists in the service, make sure you tick that box. S3 buckets are now encrypted by default, which is great, but they're encrypted with their default AWS key. So look into using custom KMS keys as well when you're encrypting. What does it mean to encrypt data, though, inside of AWS, especially RDS instances and EBS volumes? I often find the easiest way to explain this is to say, encrypting data is to lock it into your account and prove it's yours. When you encrypt a volume, you encrypt it with a key. You use a custom key. You can then share that key with other trusted parties. For example, you use a custom key in your production environment, you share that with your development environment, and then you can send a backup copy or a test copy of your data into development for testing and work, another development work that might happen. But ultimately, you're locking it into your account. By having it encrypted, if your account was compromised, for some reason, an access key, an account was compromised, someone's email got compromised. If they get into your AWS account, they cannot snapshot or copy that data off to another account of their choice. It is stuck in your account, just like BitLocker or Vault on your laptop that stops your hard drive being used in another laptop. And that's encryption. So how do I implement well-architected best practices into my business? More to the point, how do you implement well-architected into your business? There's a couple of tips that I give here generally, but ultimately securing your AWS environment is an ongoing process that requires diligence and proactive measures. By implementing essential steps like these today that we talked about today, you can fortify your infrastructure against potential threats and mitigate security risks effectively. Remember, prioritizing security is the key to maintaining the integrity and resilience of your AWS environment. When thinking about well-architected best practices and implementing them in your environment, design with well-architected in mind. Start with these foundational processes: multi-account architecture, subnet structures. No matter if it's a change or a new feature, design with well-architected in mind first. Build a strategy of remediation and prioritize the tasks in hand. Don't try and fix everything at once, because that actually may put you in a worse position. Build a strategy based upon priorities, high, medium, other, and keep it simple. A well-architected environment doesn't have to be complex or expensive. Review your architecture every 12 months. Treat it like a service for your car. Standards change regularly. Last year's best practice might be this year's security problem. And check what those best practices are. At the end of the day, we're all humans, and human error does happen. So it's always worth reviewing and remediating as well, just in case one of us has made a mistake in the environment. We got confused with the standard and we've actually implemented the wrong thing. If you're unsure, engage with a well-architected partner. We're here to help. And that's where I'm going to hand over to Michael to discuss what Thoughtworks' capabilities are in terms of well-architected remediation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alan. We covered so many, topics today just around security, but there are 6 well-architected framework pillars. There's a lot there to go over and a lot of best practice from AWS. To make it a bit easier for people to go through these yearly well-architected framework reviews, we at Thoughtworks have created our own process to really kind of reduce that barrier to entry and make it an easy exercise for businesses to review their infrastructure. So we've created a 3-hour conversational review. There's no prep work or homework required to do one of these. The conversation's guided by Alan and his team and pivots based on information that's gathered as we run through those 6 pillars. Very conversational, open, lots of questions. And often you leave those 3-hour reviews with already a bunch of recommendations and things to action and a bunch of knowledge that has been gained. The only thing that we ask is that you provide a copy of your most recent AWS bill. That allows us to get a head start on the cost optimization section by seeing what services you utilize the most And if you have architectural diagrams, we ask that you share those before the session so that we can wrap our heads around your infrastructure before we jump in for the review. Post the review, we share a detailed remediation report. It's typically within 2 to 5 business days. And this is a super, super helpful piece of information. So it's split into 3 different sections. The first section is an executive summary, and that contains our handful of, kind of highest recommendations from the review. And this is aimed at maybe less technical folks, stakeholders in the business, with a kind of overview of the main things we recommend you take away from the session. The second section is a matrix breakdown, as you kind of see from the picture on the screen here, split into the 6 pillars, identifying how many high or medium risk items we've found in your environment and how many pieces of information we want to share with you. The third part is the meaty part of the report. Now, this can be anywhere from 10 to 40 pages long, depending on the size of your environment, where we break down each one of these high and medium risks or information pieces into a paragraph that explains kind of, what doesn't align with best practice and what our recommendation is to move forwards. So love doing these for our customers, and would love to support, any of you that are listening today with one of these reviews as well. Now, why should you trust Thoughtworks and work with us? So over the last couple of years, we've delivered 311 well-architected framework reviews, actually, and that stat was taken last week. And since then, we've delivered a couple more. So we can jump that to 313. We have helped post-review customers remediate 8,199 high-risk items from their AWS environments. And our average CSAT score from these well-architected framework reviews and remediation projects that follow is 4.9 out of 5. So lots and lots of experience in running these reviews. And that's not just with customers in Australia, but around the globe. And lots of experience helping customers remediate findings post-review as well. Now, if you would like to book a review with us, there's a QR code up on the screen right now. Feel free to scan that. That will take you through to a Google form. You can pop in your name, contact details, business, and a summary of, if there are some key areas you'd like to focus on. We will reach out to you within the next week to book an introduction meeting, say hello, and schedule one of those 3-hour reviews. Looking forward to, hopefully having a bunch of you reach out to us. We'd love to support you with these. Now I want to open it up to any of our viewers to see if there are any questions. Any questions for Alan based on the security pillar? And while we're waiting to see if any pop in, Alan, I know there's a bunch of really common questions that myself and others from Thoughtworks get asked when we are meeting with customers and they are talking about the security pillar. I know a big one that often pops up is around alerting. Now, it's very difficult to figure out how to have a good alerting structure in process. I know often you can alert too much or not enough. What's a good process to define, how you set up your alerts?
Yeah, good question. A lot of the time, and I talked about this quite heavily in episode 1 as well. So if you want to watch episode 1, click the link later and you'll be able to get it. But ultimately, having a tiered strategy for alerts is highly important. At the end of the day, being able to differentiate between what's critical 24/7, got to wake somebody up, versus what is can wait till the next day. So make sure you've got a strategy and a structured logging and structured alerting system as well. As far as security is concerned, if your guard duty is going to be alerting on a critical finding, because it does tier those alerts for you. It has critical down through to low in 5 different tiers. Then you decide what's important to you. Critical and high, do you send them off to a system of alerting which is going to wake somebody up, which has to be heard of. And I would highly recommend you do send that off to something that's going to be annoying until it's fixed. Slack's always a good option. There's always somebody that enters Slack, but that's not going to wake somebody up. There are third-party solutions available, though, such as PagerDuty and Opsgenie, which are designed for on-call teams to wake people up as well. I'd highly suggest you use those when it comes to critical alerting as well. And then lastly, if it's not too important, you could always use things like SES and SNS to send email alerts, or configure some sort of webhook to go to your ticket system maybe as well.
Awesome. Great recommendations there, Alan. Appreciate it. Now, we haven't had any other questions. I've got one final one for us to end on. I know we've covered lots of topics. There's probably a quick win that a lot of viewers can, leave here today and go in action straight away. We talked about encryption. I know there's a lot of resources where you can kind of check a box to encrypt them. What's maybe one or two AWS services customers can go away today, have a look in their environment, and get encrypted straight away?
Whoa, good question. Okay. As far as encryption is concerned, it's exactly that. It's checking the box when you first create the resource, and that's the important part. But I think also what you need to have in place is some mechanism to see everything from one place and say, actually, that's not been encrypted. Because in large environments, it's very hard to go through all the EBS volumes, all the RDS volumes in multiple accounts and maybe multiple regions and say it is categorically done. So my biggest recommendation here is to implement something like Security Hub. Security Hub is the AWS solution that is a single pane of glass dashboard that shows you your security position across your whole organization, and it gives you a traffic light report and potential remediations. You can even configure it to your favorite security standard. ISO 27001, NIST, etc. They're available in there, as well as the CIS benchmark frameworks as well. If you configure it against these standards, and it will even give you a percentage score as to how good or bad you are against these frameworks as well. Gives you a goal to drive to, and helps keep you compliant as well. So Security Hub is the way to go there. There are third-party resources available as well that also do this. AWS Security Hub is the first place I'd start though.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alan. Now, we're going to end it here. Thank you, everybody, for attending the webinar today. If you would like to hear more, we are running episode 3 on reliability next week, Monday, the 18th of November, and episode 4 on cost optimization and sustainability on Wednesday, the 27th of November. Would love to see you there. The following week, Alan will be in Vegas at reInvent presenting with AWS on a couple different topics. So many more opportunities to hear from Alan over the next few weeks. You've got my email address and Alan's on the screen. You are welcome to reach out to us at any time. We would love to help you answer any questions or go through an AWS Well-Architected Framework review. Really appreciate you joining us today. I hope you all have a wonderful Wednesday afternoon.
Thanks for hosting, Mickey. I appreciate your time as well. And thank you to all the viewers watching this. And the recording will be out too later this week. Thanks, guys. Bye.